short films. As part of my master's thesis, I did a 60-minute film, and I showed it to the author whose plays I adapted. He invited me to work with him in Italy, and after that experience, I said, this is really what I want to do. Moved to New York and began from the ground zero, because I had no connections, and I became a production assistant, then went on to be production manager, producer, and eventually discovered the Hispanic advertising market, and I worked in it for 10 years. In 1989, I opened my own company, and in 2001, after 9/11, I decided that I had sold my soul to advertising, and I said, I have a tiny bit left, and I'm not going to sell that. So I began looking for something that fulfilled me. And I grabbed the camera for the first time in many, many years. In advertising, I had a big crew, a lot of people. They did everything. I only said action. And I began following immigrants in Guatemala. I would go to different towns where immigrants from Guatemala came and interview them, and then would post little portraits, 3, 4, 5-minute portraits of immigrants on YouTube. And I call that Voices of Silence. I was doing that when in 2008, I read an article on the front page of the New York Times about an interpreter who had been hired by the federal government to go to Iowa, along with 12 other interpreters, to work on the legal procedures after the largest immigration raid in the history of the US. Eric Amay Frejas wrote an essay, 14-page essay called Interpreting After the Largest Immigration Raid in the History of the US. And what he wrote was so impactful that I couldn't believe it. So I said, I have to go see for myself. With the plan of being in Iowa 4 days, I traveled there in July of 2008. Instead, I stayed 2 weeks, and what I thought would be one trip became 29 trips. I then accompanied some of the immigrants that I met in Iowa back to Guatemala to try to understand what pushed people to leave everything and against all odds, travel through Mexico, through the desert, and eventually get to Iowa. The result of that, of those three years of work, was Abuse the Postville Raid, which I showed in this campus in 2012, and there's a copy in your library. I began touring with that film, going to college campuses, the same way I'm doing now with this film. And one day, I was invited by Minnesota West Community College in Worthington, Minnesota. After the screening, a woman who you will meet today, whose name is Lisa Kramer, came to me and said, Luis, my name is Lisa Kramer. I go to Guatemala a lot with my church on mission trips. And I have met Guatemalans here because there's many immigrants in Worthington. And so she invited me to breakfast next day. We became friends. And about 6 months later, she calls me and says, Luis, I'm very happy. I'm a grandmother for the first time. I love spending time with my grandson. I could never imagine not seeing him. And I have also noticed that many of the Guatemalan families in Worthington have U.S. citizen children who have never met their grandparents. What do you think, she said, if we took a group of these kids to Guatemala to meet their grandparents? I said, Lisa, I think it's a great idea. I'll help you as much as I can, and I'd like to make a film about it. So the rest is history, and that's the result. Just one more thing. As you watch the film, and before we engage in a conversation after it, I'd like to ask you to see if there's any part in the film or anybody in the film who speaks to you in a personal way. Today, I was asked, why do I do this? And the answer is very simple. It's the answer I gave on December 11th of last year to Pope Francis in the Vatican when I handed him a copy of my two films. I said, Pope Francis, these are the stories of the immigrants from Guatemala that have touched my heart and changed my life. It's as simple as that. So I hope that this film will touch your heart in a special way. Thank you, and hope you enjoy the film. Their first language is English, and their Spanish is, some speak a little better than others, but a lot of them don't speak a lot of Spanish. And some of them said, I want to learn more Spanish. And the grandparents' main language is Mam, which is a Maya language. So communication had to be at a different level.
So were the funds for the trip through the church or through the families, or how did that work out?
It was a combination. The families put some money. The kids and the Familias Juntas group did fundraising. They sell Guatemalan fabrics and clothing and other things, and they also got donations from private donations. And the kids did. They go to a pizza ranch and they clean tables and bus dishes, and they get a percentage of the tips for that day. We also got some help in Guatemala for the transportation and for the lodging.
That is a very touching documentary. Thank you so much. It's an honor to have you here. I'm looking at Elizabeth, and I see that she's very, very moved by this documentary. I know that we all know that she's from Guatemala. I was wondering whether you would like to share your own ideas and emotions about this documentary.
So I'm going to Guatemala. I could have easily gone to Spain, but I feel that going to Guatemala, I'm going to challenge my identity. Because as you can see, a lot of the kids, they grew up learning English as their own language, and they'll go to school, but they don't, but the way they look, you would have thought that they probably knew Spanish or knew like a native language, because they look almost indigenous themselves. And it's like, I feel like, I'm trying to formulate my thoughts, but I know Spanish, but I don't know much about my own culture. My mom was born in Guatemala, but we don't, from what I've asked, they don't know that they come from a certain indigenous group. So going to Guatemala, I'm going to be able to see family out there that I hadn't seen before. Sadly, I can't go see my grandma because my grandma died in 2010. And so I was able to see her when I was in 6th grade when I went to Guatemala, but I had no clue about the historical importance of Guatemala or any of that, because I'd never had to question that. So coming to CSBSJU, I've come to question my identity. I've come to question what it means to be Latina. What does it mean to be Guatemalan American, when I didn't grow up with the Guatemalan culture. I grew up with the Mexican culture. So going to Guatemala, I feel like I'm going to find my roots and be more knowledgeable of what it means to be Guatemalan.
I think this is the global universe we inhabit. This is transnational families, and which it can be difficult, but also I think it brings the fact that we are all human beings. And I think that that's something that is missing in the conversation about immigration sometimes. Yes?
Thank you so much for coming. I'm just wondering, what types of challenges did you face bringing a video crew into a very personal kind of reunion in Guatemala?
Thank you for your words. We had a very small crew. It was a camera person, a sound person, and myself. We talked to the families in Worthington before the project and said, we want to tell your story, and We want to film you, the kids, and the grandparents. And they got together as a group and talked among themselves and decided as a group that they would allow us to do it. And now that they have seen the film, they, as close as 2 days ago, we were in Worthington, and Catalina, the woman who says that she would like to ask forgiveness from her parents for having left so long, she said to everybody who was there, "Thank you for being interested in our stories. It makes us feel good." So, so that was one of the challenges. Also, I helped organize the trip. You know, the logistics were quite complicated because you have a little town in the middle of Minnesota. These kids have to get to Omaha or Minneapolis, fly to Houston, from Houston to Guatemala. From Guatemala, they have to go by bus to San Marcos, which is too far to go on that same day. So we spent the night at Lake Atitlan, at the Misión San Lucas Toliman, which some of you, I heard, know. And then the next day we go to San Marcos. That's where they met their grandparents. Everybody spent the night together there at the grandparents went to a hotel, the kids and the chaperones stayed at the school, and next morning they all left to their mountain villages, where you can only get by using a four-wheel drive. So it was a lot of logistics. But once we got there, I said, I'm not involved anymore in the logistics, we're now going to film. Yes?
Do these children who live in Worthington, did they know each other prior to leaving, and if not, have they built relationships with each other since this?
That's a good question. Some of them knew each other. Some go to school together, but not a lot. They go to the same church, and they knew each other, but not very well. And they have formed more closer bonds now, as kids and as families. Yes?
A little technical question. In the captions, why is God spelled G''D"?
The Jewish tradition is such that you don't spell the whole name of God. So there is a streak of Sephardic Jewishness in my family, and I respect that tradition. So. Yes?
Hi, thanks again for being here. I think the film is phenomenal, and I really appreciate that you chose to focus on a small town in Minnesota, even though these stories are replicated all over the U.S. and all over the globe. I'm wondering if there are things kind of back along the challenges you face, if there are things that you kind of made the decision to not put in the film, either for emotional reasons or personal reasons or maybe ethical reasons that you just felt, and you don't have to share what they are, but I'm wondering if you could discuss kind of the editing process, and since it's such a personal story, are there things that you kind of use your own discretion to say, like, I don't need that, or?
Very good. Well, thank you for having me. You know, I'm here because I was invited, so I really appreciate that. Yes, and I will share one very particular point. There's a scene when the uncle and the aunt of Brandon are saying, you know, when he was 7 months old, my sister came and said, will you take care of him? And she says, me dio miedo, estaba mamando. I got scared, he was breastfeeding. And then she says, I told her, I asked her, what happens if he dies? And she said, if he dies, please bury him. And I thought about putting it in the film. I did put it in the first cut. And then I talked to the mother, and I said, I have this scene, your sister says this, and how would you feel if I left that? And she says, I don't remember if I said that, but if I did, or if my sister says I did, then I did. However, I would feel bad because I wouldn't want my son to hear that. So I didn't put it. Yeah. Editing the film was my technique, my system in editing a documentary is I don't do an outline, but I look for the beginning and the end. And then if I find those, I feel very good. I found the beginning, I knew what the beginning was, so we found a shaman who would do the ceremony at a particular time of the day. And I invited all the families, but only a couple families came, and only one of the kids came, which is Brian, with his mother. And that became a very special moment. I knew I wanted to play with the sunrise and the sunset, so I filmed sunrises and sunsets in Guatemala and in Worthington, and they did, we matched them. We were almost close to a finished cut, and we had a scene where the kids were telling their story in an auditorium with a lot of people from Worthington. And my wife saw it and she said, no. The kids are too small in the frame, and you have a lot of Anglo-Saxon people reacting to this, and that takes away. So I decided to go back to Worthington and interview the kids individually against the background that is the photographer's background, and that was a very fortunate decision because they had matured a little bit more. They had had time to think about it, and what they said was remarkable. Yeah. One thing that I've learned to do in my years of filmmaking is to not ask too many questions and let the camera roll after they finish answering a question, and just wait and listen to the silence. And it really brings very special moments. I had a couple editors, but the one that was the main editor was also the photographer of the scenes that we did at the end in Worthington. And I knew I wanted original Guatemalan music, and the engineer who does all my sound design and mixes, he lives now in Barcelona, he said, you should try this group, and it's called Música Aj, and they use natural instruments. And I sent them a small version of the film, a small movie, and I said, you know, what do you suggest for this, this, and that? And they would send me pieces, and we would put them in and refine the cut accordingly. The beginning, the flute that opens the film, it opens all my films. It's a chirimia, it's a very primitive, basic Maya flute, and I'm just fascinated by that sound. Remember I asked you if anything spoke to you in a personal way? Did anybody remember anything? Yes?
I remember this part, I believe it was Catalina's daughter, that said, when my grandparents held me and said they felt like their mother. That was pretty special. I remember that quote most.
Yeah. Now, Catalina and her daughters were at the screening in Worthington 2 days ago. And I asked them to share with us what their parents had told them, because their parents came to the premiere in Guatemala the day before. I said, what did they say about the film? And Catalina said that their mother just couldn't believe it. First of all, a lot of them had never been to the city. And none of them had ever been to a movie theater, a real movie theater. No TV. So it was overwhelming. And she said that she cried a lot, and that she felt very happy because she saw her daughter so big, and at the same time she felt sad because she wasn't there. So, yes, sir.
The scene in the documentary where the parents say that they haven't, the kids haven't seen the grandparents ever. I can relate to that because I have two younger brothers, 7 and 9, and they never met my grandparents in Mexico. Last time I was there was 11 years ago,
Where was that?
Mexico,
Mexico.
and Darimor.
So you met your grandparents when you were 11?
Yeah.
How was that?
Well, from what I can remember, it was amazing. It was an amazing experience because before that, I saw them when I was 5 months. So all 11 years later, I finally see them again, and like I said, from what I can remember, it was an amazing experience, and I just feel kind of sad that, actually I do feel sad that my younger brothers done with that is they never seen my grandma or my great grandma. I never met my grandpa who passed away when my dad was 11.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, I've seen these kids sort of mature very quickly after this experience. Yesterday, they came to Marshall again, and the president of the college was talking to them and said, now you're part of our family, and you have to come back here, and you have to think about this college when you're ready to go to college. And for them, the idea of going to college did not exist before, you know? So just the fact that they're seeing other people reacting to their stories, it's very empowering. And I think that this is the story of this country, you know. One generation sacrifices for the next generation. And that's one thing that the kids seem to have internalized now. They appreciate what their parents did and understand why they did it, you know. So that's nice.
I think we have time for one more question.
Or one more comment.
Is your family history, then do you see your immigrants and your family in the film?
Well, I wasn't able to go to my mother's funeral because I was in the middle of applying for residency, and there was just no time, and I was in Los Angeles. So I identify with them a little bit. My daughter is first generation born, so there is some connection. By the way, somebody asked me how you get the film. You can buy the film online at Abrazos, thefilm.com, and I have a couple copies today at a special price, half of what you would pay online, so if anybody wants.
Thank you very much.